Good morning, Miller.
Morning.
It's good to see you.
Good to see you too. And Rob's on his way.
Okay. We may be it since Paul is out. Excuse me.
Yeah,
We'll
yeah.
see. Tony
Gotta
may
go
show
and
up.
have
How's your week been?
busy. Busy.
Mm.
We had like a trunk or treat at the school,
Hmm.
and oh, and Rob's parents are in town. So we went and hiked up to the Big Four ice caves yesterday.
What
Yeah,
in the world?
it's as cool as it sounds.
Wow.
Um, it's near well, let's see. It's kind of in the middle of nowhere, but it's
Hmm.
north of us. Uh, and like in the like Mount Baker Snoqualmie National Forest.
Wow.
Um, you kind of drive out to the middle of nowhere, and then you hike up, and there's like this hunk of ice that stays there all year, and this waterfall that comes through and like melts a cave.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah,
That sounds amazing.
really cool,
Wow.
and not a very hard hike. So it was nice.
How far north is it from you?
Let's see. I mean, it took us like an hour and a half. Hang on. Before. It's like an hour and a half from us. So
Okay.
like 81 miles drive.
Mhm.
Yeah.
By the
So
way, your glasses are awesome. It's like they're iridescent.
thanks. They look even brighter
That's
on
really cool.
computer.
Well, yeah, those are awesome. Yeah, we didn't do anything this weekend. We had our took our vaccines.
Ah yeah.
So yesterday
Rough
was
day.
spent just sick feeling and just not wanting to do anything. So I've gotten zero accomplished this weekend, but except getting vaccinated, which I guess is
Very
good.
important.
Yeah. Yeah, just gross. You know the thing that like when your ribs ache, but
Yeah.
it's not like
Yeah.
just not like why? Mm,
Yeah.
mm,
I think I slept. Like it just put me to sleep for a while
yeah. Yeah.
after I got mine.
Yeah.
Mm.
I did find an amazing game though. It's called Ink Illuminati. I don't know if you've ever heard of this.
No, I haven't heard of this one.
It's a strategy game where you're playing as little illustrated manuscript creatures.
Yeah.
So it's like done as an illuminated manuscript and like your opponents are like Hildegard and Saint Francis. And so you draw little characters, and then the characters are doing battle, and then you have to kind of manipulate them on the page as your it's it's really cute and hilarious. Like you get, sword wielding pigeons and there's a
So,
they're actually based on actual characters. Like there's a donkey that will play a bagpipe with its butt. Um So it's really, I was like, this is someone had my number when they made this game, actually.
right? So is
It,
it like a computer game or a
yeah, yeah, I
oh
think
that's
it
cool.
it may be on PC too. I'm sure it probably is, but it's on X. I played it on Xbox, but yeah, it's a pretty good strategy game too. I mean, just like if you like strategy games. But your illustrator can sometimes move in with their hand and bump characters like off the edge of the page,
Oh,
and it's really funny. I mean, and aggravating, irritating when it happens. Hey, Rob.
Hey,
Yeah, I was just telling Miller there's a game that I found this weekend called Ink Illuminati, which is it's a strategy game using um, illustrated manuscript characters, which is really funny. But
oh
anyway,
wow.
yeah, yeah, it's
I
good.
overheard Miller telling you about going to the ice cave.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Very cool. This is a great time of year to do it, is it?
Yeah,
Fantastic.
because sometimes it's covered in snow, but and so you can't see the caves. But then other times, like the caves haven't like melted through yet. So,
Yeah,
but this
yeah.
time it was pretty spectacular.
That's really cool. That sounds like something I need to see.
Yeah, yeah. There's a lot of cool stuff out here actually
Yeah. Good morning,
in
Sherry.
Denver.
Yes, we can help you out anytime.
Yep. Well, why don't I think let me go ahead and get started. I know Paula's out today. Tony may join us, but let's just go ahead and start as we are. I tell you what, if um Miller, do you mind being the liturgist? And Rob, if you can be voice of the people.
Okay.
And then let's see if um Miller, if you can do the Jeremiah reading, I'll do the Mark reading. Okay. So let's go ahead and share that up. All right. Whenever y'all are ready.
Hello, it is October the 27th, and on this day in 312, Roman Emperor Constantine claimed to have seen a vision of the cross, or Chi Rho, at the Battle of the Milvian Bridge, which said, "In this sign, conquer." Constantine would go on to make Christianity the official religion of the empire. Today, in 1553, Michael Servetus was burned at the stake after being condemned for heresy by John Calvin. Servetus had been a Protestant reformer, but later rejected the doctrine of the Trinity and infant baptism. He was executed in part because Calvin wanted to prove to French Catholics that he was just as much against heresy as they were. The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Hear these words of invitation.
The hospitality of God knows no bounds.
The love of God is immeasurable.
The generosity of God is beyond our wildest dreams.
We gather today as invited ones,
As beloved ones,
as blessed ones.
draw near and let us break the bread of life.
Today's responsive reading comes from Psalm 34. A psalm of David, when he pretended to be crazy before Abimelech, who banished him so that he left.
I will bless the Lord at all times. His praise will always be in my mouth.
I praise the Lord. Let the suffering listen and rejoice.
Magnify the Lord with me. Together let us lift his name up high.
I sought the Lord, and he answered me. He delivered me from all my fears.
Those who look to God will shine. Their faces are never ashamed.
This suffering person cried out. The Lord listened and saved him from every trouble.
On every side, the Lord's messenger protects those who honor God, and he delivers them.
Taste and see how the Lord is.
The one who takes refuge in him is truly happy.
Today's Hebrew Bible reading is Jeremiah 31, 7 through 9. The Lord proclaims, "Sing joyfully for the people of Jacob. Shout for the leading nation. Raise your voices with praise and call out. The Lord has saved his people, the remaining few in Israel. I'm going to bring them back from the north. I will gather them from the ends of the earth. Among them will be the blind and the disabled, expectant mothers and those in labor. A great throng will return here. With tears of joy they will come while they pray. I will bring them back. I will lead them by quiet streams and on smooth paths so they don't stumble. I will be Israel's father. Ephraim will be my oldest child."
Our New Testament reading comes from Mark chapter 10, verses 46 and following. Jesus and his followers came into Jericho. As Jesus was leaving Jericho, together with his disciples and a sizable crowd, A blind beggar named Bartimaeus, Timaeus' son, was sitting beside the road. When he heard that Jesus of Nazareth was there, he began to shout, "Jesus, son of David, show me mercy." Many scolded him, telling him to be quiet, but he shouted even louder, "Son of David, show me mercy." Jesus stopped and said, "Call him forward." They called the blind man. "Be encouraged, get up, he's calling you." Throwing his coat to the side, he jumped up and came to Jesus. Jesus asked him, "What do you want me to do for you?" The blind man said, "Teacher, I want to see." Jesus said, "Go, your faith has healed you." At once he was able to see, and he began to follow Jesus on the way. May God bless the hearing of this word.
Thanks be to God.
Michael Servetus wrote, "If I have taken the word by any reason, it has been because I think it is grave to kill men under the pretext that they are mistaken on the interpretation of some point. For we know that even the chosen ones are not exempt from sometimes being wrong. And may the Lord destroy all the tyrants of the church. And I will burn, but this is a mere incident. We shall continue our discussion in eternity."
So, thank you all for getting us started with worship today. We'll go into a time of prayer. If you are on Facebook or YouTube, feel free to join the prayer by putting your prayer requests in the comment or the chat. We will. If you are watching on a streaming service, like Facebook or YouTube, please like or just comment with where you're watching from. That gives us a way to count you and your presence with us today. Let's go to God in prayer. Gracious God, in this world that is fraught with conflict, both political and physical and moral, we ask that you give us insight and wisdom, remembering the ways that Christians have failed in the past to follow Jesus and instead have followed the way of empire. We lift up today every place where there is religious persecution, where people are prevented from living as they truly want to live, where people are prisoners of conscience, where who they are is attacked. God, we especially lift up to you places of global conflict, places where there's war and violence. But we also lift up to you the places where there's violence in people's hearts and between people who are close in relationship. We lift up to you victims of domestic violence, people who are under the influence of a substance, people who are struggling with worry over finances. We recognize that poverty is violence, that poor healthcare is violence. We recognize the ways that environmental damage is violence. And we ask you, God, to turn our hearts and our policies and our leaders and ourselves toward peace. And invite those of you who are listening to lift up your own prayers if you like. Again, you can place them in the comments or the chat. I'll keep an eye on YouTube if one of you would keep an eye on Facebook.
I've got Facebook up.
Thank you.
For Chris's successful eye procedure tomorrow,
Lord, hear our prayer.
that Sherry might find a job,
Lord, hear our prayer.
For Tiffany,
Lord, hear our prayer.
the trans folks around the world,
Lord, hear our prayer.
for Camille's mother, aunt, and all the elderly,
Lord, hear our prayer.
for Joetta Davis,
Lord, hear our prayer.
for poll workers,
Lord, hear our prayer.
For all those continuing to recover from the recent hurricanes and disasters.
Lord, hear our prayer.
Traveling mercies for those traveling.
Lord, hear our prayer.
God, for those that we've named and for those who are unnamed and for the prayers we don't know how to pray, we give you thanks that you hear and that you answer. And we pray the prayer that Jesus taught us. Holy One, our Mother and Father, let your name be revered. Let your reign come. Let your will be done on earth as it is in the heavens. Give us today the bread we need for today, and forgive our sins as we forgive those who sin against us. Save us from the time of trial and deliver us from evil. For yours is the sovereignty, the power, and the glory now and forever. Amen. I'm going to add a prayer for Kyle to also find a job. Amen. So thank you for getting us started today, and thanks to those of you who are watching on Zoom or YouTube or Facebook. We're glad you're with us today. Today's story from the gospel actually continues. We've been in Mark the last several weeks, and it actually continues a theme that we've heard the last couple of weeks about greatness and power. Um, just last couple of weeks ago, we started talking about greatness and power. The disciples come up to Jesus, uh, James and John, and they say to Jesus, Lord, we want you to do for us what we have a favor to ask of you. And he says, what do you want me to do for you? And James and John say, let us sit at your left and right hand. Now, the words they use right there, or excuse me, the words Jesus says to them, tell me what you want me to do for you, right? What shall I do for you? Are the same words he uses in this story. Okay. And then last week, was it last week or week? Anyway, last week we heard a story about a rich man who comes to Jesus and again asks, what can I do to inherit eternal life? And Jesus gives him tells him, oh, follow the commandments. And he says, I do those. And Jesus says, okay, then sell everything and come follow me. And he can't. He turns away and walks away. All right. And this story kind of concludes this section, and it's of a blind beggar on the side of the road. Most of the action in the story is between the beggar and the crowd. He's calling out, the crowd is silencing him. Jesus finally hears, says, come forward. He comes forward, and again, same words he used with James and John. What do you want me to do for you? And he says, teacher, I want to see. Jesus says, your faith has made you well. Go on your way. And then Bartimaeus follows Jesus. Instead of going away, he comes and follows Jesus. And this is kind of like an end point to those other stories that we've just heard. It kind of shows finally, here's an example of Mark is saying, I think, what Christians should do, right? And it's also sort of an illustration that just as it's harder for a camel to go through an eye of a needle than it is for a rich man to follow Jesus, a blind beggar is actually a better candidate Again, just because he's asking, because he's honest. The dude even flings his coat to the side. Like he's got nothing, right? He flings his coat to that detail is not irrelevant. Whatever he has, he gives it away. He throws it away and he comes up to Jesus. And what he wants is his sight. Now, of course, this is also metaphorical, right? I mean, I think part of the idea here is Christians are supposed to be asking for sight, asking for wisdom, enlightenment, right? To be able to see clearly. And once he can see clearly, he doesn't just go on his way. He follows Jesus. He does what Jesus said for the rich man to do, right? And this, by the way, is just before Jesus is about to go to Jerusalem and have a confrontation and ultimately be killed. Um, so great little story. I don't have a lot to say about this story. I do have, I feel it is important on the day, and let me just share the way that I set up our liturgy is always I look at what happened in Christian history on that day, right? And Michael Servetus was executed, and Constantine the Great declared that Christianity would be the official religion of the Roman Empire. And I think it is just such a great illustration of what we've been talking about the last few weeks. Um, that Christianity or that Christians often try to follow greatness and power rather than the way of Christ, and that these two things are incompatible. The way of greatness and power and domination is not compatible with the way of Christ. Constantine, you've probably heard me talk about Constantine before. He was in conflict with Max. I can't remember what the name of the emperor was. This battle at the Milvian Bridge was a conflict between two would-be rulers of Rome, and Constantine. This is kind of later on. He told Eusebius what he had experienced, and he said, "Oh, I had this vision of Cairo in the sky, and in this sign conquer." And so supposedly they had this inscribed on their shields, and God gave them victory in this political fight. And then Constantine decided that Christianity should be the official religion of the Roman Empire. Now, probably what actually happened was that Christianity was growing anyway. Constantine put his finger in the wind and decided that this was probably better than his, usual sun worship, Sol Invictus. And so, like, he was the J.D. Vance of his time. Um, he essentially, made Christianity into the law of Rome. Now, had been persecutions, Nero, Octavian, various other, not Octavian, Claudius, various other emperors had persecuted Christians. I think probably most historians think that Christianity made a bigger deal out of those persecutions. It wasn't a huge number of executions. There weren't huge numbers of Christians being thrown to the lions or set on fire as human torches at Nero's garden parties. But I mean, it was awful, clearly. But Christianity just kept growing. They couldn't stamp it out. And around 300, I think Constantine saw the writing on the wall. Christianity, which had been sort of a anti-empire religion, then became a tool of the empire. And I think it's significant. I wanted to share today's date about Michael Servetus because even during the Protestant Reformation, as Protestants were pushing back against the power of the Roman Catholic Church, a lot of them just wanted to establish their own little kingdoms, their own little fiefdoms. None more so than John Calvin, who established a theocracy in Geneva. Now, John Calvin, oh man, Calvin. In some ways, I want to give him the benefit of the doubt because he was, um, I think his whole predestination thing, in some ways, I think was pastoral. I like to share with people, John Wesley and John Calvin really had similar pastoral concerns. People would come to them saying, you know, I've prayed for faith, but I don't really feel, I wonder if I'm saved. I'm not sure if I'm saved or not. And John Wesley said, you know what? Fake it till you make it. Uh, Someone told John Wesley, or Moravian told John Wesley, preach faith until you have it, and when you have it, you'll have faith. So the whole idea was you act your way into belief, you act your way into feeling differently toward God. John Calvin had a different approach. He said, "No, you're elect. You can't do anything about it. You're either saved or you're not." Which uh, I'm not sure that's entirely helpful, but I think it was in some ways a pastoral response to people. He was saying, "You're elect. The if you've been chosen by God, Satan's not going to sneak in and steal you out the back door." So John Calvin had a different pastoral approach, but the other part was he really believed, in some ways, as I do, that Christianity should involve a vision of the way the world operates. It's just that he believed it was imposed from the top down instead of the bottom up. So he created a theocracy, not unlike what a lot of Christians want to create in our country today. And Michael Servetus had been a friend of his. Um, Michael Servetus was from Spain. He actually his parents, I think it may have been his mother, um, may have been one of the forced conversions from Judaism during the Spanish Inquisition. So because Michael Servetus knew Hebrew and he could read Hebrew in the original language, which, by the way, most biblical scholars of the time were not allowed to learn Hebrew. Like the idea was you should read it in the approved church translation, which is Latin. You shouldn't go back and read the original text in Hebrew because that would also imply that you were kind of a Jewish sympathizer and, Jews were wrong according to these early Christians. So, but Michael Servetus knew Hebrew. Hmm. So, when he went back and read things like Song of Songs, he said, this is love poetry. This is not a metaphor of Jesus's love for the church. This is Hebrew love poetry, which that didn't go over well. What really didn't go over well was his denial of the doctrine of the Trinity, and also he was kind of an Anabaptist sympathizer. He didn't believe in infant baptism. He also didn't believe in original sin. So um, I'm a Trinitarian. I don't believe in original sin either. So I could easily be on the stake with Michael Servetus. Um, he was actually trying to flee one form of persecution. He was fleeing persecution by the Catholic Church. And for some reason, even though he already knew his writings were not appreciated in Geneva, he stopped in Geneva and went to church. Someone recognized him and they arrested him. And they brought him before John Calvin. And um, John Calvin really felt pressure to show that he was just as much against heresy as the Roman Catholic Church. And now that actually gives him a little too much credit, honestly, because he did talk about just how he felt heretics needed to be rooted out, you know. Um, he was in favor of killing them. So uh, he did in some ways, I think, try to give Servetus an out a couple of times. He felt bad about killing him, but he killed him. Not personally, of course. There was a committee, and as we do, we outsource our worst acts to committees. But that's what happened. Now, the reason I want to bring up this history is to say, again, and you guys have heard me say this before, I don't think Christianity is compatible with the way of power and domination. There's sort of a basic level of Christian morality, which is simply we should be pursuing a world in which people do not kill each other. That's like really base level. We don't kill people. And for some reason, that seems really hard for Christians to grasp. Like, we just do not kill people. I don't even know what else to say besides that. um, I want to go back and just say the quotes that I selected from Michael Servetus, I think are really powerful and poignant. Um, he says, I think it is grave to kill men under the pretext that they are mistaken on the interpretation of some point, for we know that even the chosen ones are not exempt from sometimes being wrong. Oh my gosh. If we could just incorporate that level of spiritual humility into everything we do, I think it would be radically transformative and would make Christianity look a whole lot much more like the way of Christ. Um, I also had to include, may the Lord destroy all the tyrants of the church, because that's sometimes, I want to say destroy, I don't mean like kill them, but I do think tyranny and the church should be incompatible. And ultimately he had this vision of, um, this life is not the end. He says, I will burn, but this is a mere incident. We shall continue our discussion in eternity. In other words, he says, I'm going to get the last word. Again, how much, in terms of following the example of Christ, how much is that? You can kill me, but we're not done. I love that so much. Anyway, so again, sure, he was a heretic. We shouldn't be killing heretics. It really seems like a basic understanding of the way of Christ is that we do not kill. And if you trace it all the way back, I mean, starting with Servetus, going back to Constantine, and then back even further to I mean, Jesus was killed in part because he was a blasphemer. It seems like a basic understanding of that's not what we should be doing, and that following the way of Christ means being much more like blind Bartimaeus, where we're simply asking God to help us see more clearly instead of asking God for greatness or pursuing the way of wealth, power, and domination. All right, that's basically all I got. We'll love to hear y'all's responses.
I love talking about Constantine. I feel like, I mean, obviously, humanity is what it is, but I feel like a lot of the problems that we
Mhm.
experience in, like, Christianity, especially, like religion,
Mhm.
capital R or capital C, like organized
Yeah.
Christianity. There you go. Like a lot of it back, like it was stamped in at least at that point,
Mhm.
because in that book I read about the biblical canon, like prior to Constantine, they didn't really have like an official biblical text,
No. Right.
like there were a bunch of books that people were like, yeah, these are important, and there
Mhm.
was the Hebrew Bible that was fairly consistent. um but when Rome decided, oh, I think we're going to stop using our resources to persecute Christians and try to get them on our side and, go with the flow. Uh,
Mhm.
I mean, and I love that, like, he came to that point, like, in conflict with another potential ruler. Like,
Yeah.
he wanted the partisans, like,
Mhm.
it's just like, hey, you guys, Christians, come be on my side.
Yeah.
Anyway, but he was the one who was like, okay, I want a copy of the Bible. And it wasn't necessarily that point when it became, this is the Bible, but
Mhm.
they were the first ones to ask for the Bible to be codified, to like say, hey, we need the specific books, I need to know what's in them, and it needs to not change,
Right.
because it was a very, like, there was this very like normative impulse in the Roman culture of like, things need to be consistent, things need to be official, things need, yeah.
Y'all need
So
to be on the same page, basically. Yeah.
right,
Hmm.
right. There needs to be a right answer. Um, so I mean, there's a big problem.
Hmm.
And that really does sort of roll forward to like Michael Servetus, who is my new superhero. I did not know about him.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. And like just even the content of his like his dream, you
Hmm.
know, the like conquer in this what was this? How does it go?
Yeah.
Like
In this sign conquer was the
in this
typical.
sign conquer, they
Yeah.
were already
Mhm.
doing that.
Yeah. Yeah.
They were already killing people on cross. They invented that.
Yeah.
Like
Right. Yeah. That's a
their
good point.
own symbol.
Yeah.
They didn't have to change.
Right. Right. Yeah.
Like
You guys
how
invented
convenient,
this form of execution. Why do you need like,
right? Rome
yeah.
killed Jesus.
Yeah.
Oh man.
Yeah. No, it really
Yeah.
was. You're right. I mean, it was Constantine needed Chris in order for them to form Christianity or Christians into a block that they could manipulate. Part of it was they needed everyone to be on the same page. Um, and I mean, I will say, so in terms of canonization, there was a process, an organic process already going on. Origen had a list of books, but it was a much more organic process. It wasn't being imposed from outside, and there was a diversity of theological opinions.
There were a lot of
Um,
different lists, really.
yeah.
Like, yeah. Anyway.
Well, but and there was an inherent diversity. Like the idea was, we don't well, I mean there was persecution and heresy and all that stuff, but it was a lot more there were a lot more diverse opinions before Constantine decided that everyone needed to be on the same page. So, Rob, go ahead.
I think it's interesting. So I'm not well versed in the history of what I'm about to speculate about. Okay,
Hmm.
so uh, cautionary note, but it does feel like we have 1700 years now that are shaped not only by the legacy of Constantine in an imperial sense, but honestly, I just look back and I think this has to be something that emerged from like Roman contract law,
Hmm.
because the whole concept of heresy and the response to it, you know, it's really you are in violation of the contract,
Hmm.
right? And that contract, see what Constantine did is make that contract constitutive of the social relation, right? When it's a state religion and it's official, well, now everybody's in, right? You're in the tent. These two things, we can't tell them apart anymore, right?
Hmm.
The
Hmm.
religion and the state, because Rome didn't do things that way. And so, it's this idea of like, well, what are the terms of your citizenship?
Hmm.
What are the terms of your participation in the social order, right? And because now, so I mean, it's the same thing, right? Like the reason they were persecuting the Christians that they did persecute was it's like, okay, we've got to remind people that like, no, 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 there's a primary cult around here, and you have to do
Hmm.
your obeisance to the emperor, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
And so when Constantine rebrands, now it's like, well, no, 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 we this doesn't mean that we can all go willy nilly. Like you're still signing up for a set of things,
Yeah.
and I mean, so then as Miller's alluding to, like you get into all the arguments over okay, what should be in the biblical canon, what sources are official enough to be worth using, by everyone, which ones are especially dubious that we have to watch out for and make sure people don't use for
Hmm.
whatever, reasons. And then you get into the development of the creeds, of course, where it's like, okay, this has become so complex and so proliferated. We're going to try to get down to just brass tacks and be like, okay, these are the things that you really have to assent to. Like, I
Hmm.
understand the constructive impulse behind that,
Yeah,
but it's still on another level. I mean, it's committee work, and we know what committees are good for.
it is.
And so I just think it's interesting that all of this would go away trying to hold people to something that you think of in contractual terms.
Hmm.
Like they
Hmm.
don't owe you
Yeah.
Like, this
Right.
is the part that just kills me. Is like, wait a
Yeah.
minute, how did you decide they owed you anything?
Yeah.
How did you decide that it mattered that Michael Servetus thinks you're wrong?
Exactly. Yeah.
How did you decide that it mattered?
Hmm.
And so, this, I even see this sort of ramifying in an interesting constitutional way in a political sense, because we know in American constitutionalism, it's very much about the written text, right?
Hmm.
At least allegedly. And this very strong sense of like, ah, yes, the holy documents, right?
Hmm.
And I do think it's interesting to contrast that with like the Constitution in the UK, which they don't have a single written constitution. There's a body of constitutional law. They refer to the Constitution, but it's very amorphous, right? It's
Hmm.
much more about precedent and insightful commentaries on precedent, where that commentary is very much about, well, what way of thinking about the Constitution in the constitutive sense, not like that is a document that we named with a capital C, the
Right.
Constitution, but
Right.
how are we constituted,
Right.
right?
Hmm.
What
Hmm.
makes us? How do we work? And so there's a body of historical consensus about, well, when we've done it this way, it didn't go well, and that king ended up dead. And when we did it this way, it went well, and so we've kept doing it that way,
Right.
and that's
Yeah.
the Constitution.
Yeah.
And I just think, that does seem like a way to avoid some problems of like, I mean, excessive scrupulosity
Hmm.
and like obsession with like nitpicking contractual terms that need not have been contractual terms in the first place, but
Hmm.
now they are, and now somebody's going to get killed.
Yeah. 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 I no, I think you're right. And I like the way you put that. And there's a implicit contract or an explicit one that that the idea is now that if we want this to be part of our greatness, part of our expansion of power, that we really have to make sure that people do feel like they owe this to us. Like everyone is obligated to do this. Yeah. And
Well, and it's the kind of project that people get enthusiastic about, right?
mhm,
I mean, we sit around and badmouth Constantine. Many, many, many more people, traditional conservatives, especially some
mhm,
of these like very fashy militant,
mhm.
like neo-Catholic types, right?
Sure.
They
Yeah.
are all about Constantine. Like, take up
Hmm.
the sword, in hoc signo vinces, man. Like,
Yeah.
they are down to
Yeah.
pound. Like,
Yeah. Yes.
Pax Romana,
yeah.
Yeah. Impose civilization on the savages, right? Yeah. Miller, go ahead. I see your hand up.
Yeah. Um, I think I kind of want to like bring this stuff back to the series of Mark stories you were talking about.
Hmm.
Like how basically all those stories are like people in dialogue with Jesus.
Hmm. Hmm.
you know, Again, admittedly, like James and John, that was it, right? James and John.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Yeah. Hmm.
they were talking about some stupid stuff,
Hmm.
like oh, where are
Yeah.
we gonna sit in heaven? Like,
Yes.
like Jesus is like,
Are we
Exactly.
really talking about this?
right? Um, which I mean, admittedly, kind of makes me think about like nitpicky conversations about creeds and the
Hmm.
Trinity and nonsense. Like,
Yeah.
was Jesus circumcised or something like that?
Right.
Why are we talking about this? Saturn. Have you heard about Saturn's rings?
No. Uh-uh.
Look that up.
Okay.
I don't know.
Wait, what was it?
Um, I didn't really mean to go down this
Okay.
but there's the idea that every part of Jesus was resurrected
Mm.
and Jesus was circumcised. So
Oh, right. So what part of it? Yeah, I see. Right.
Vivified foreskin somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
anyway,
Gotcha.
so nitpicky stuff.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
the whole point is that, like the rich man, he comes in and they're just sort of talking about, like, well, what is it? What do I really have to do?
Hmm.
And I mean, Jesus gives him the obvious answer of like,
Hmm.
don't do terrible things.
Hmm.
And
Follow the law, right? Uh-huh.
yeah. And then the guy's like, but what else? There has to be something else. And
Hmm.
and then Jesus is like, well, you could do this. you could give everything up and join me.
Hmm.
And like the guy's just like, oh man, and leaves. But
Yeah.
I don't think that guy was condemned by Jesus
Hmm.
for what he had trouble with. I
Hmm.
think that a lot of these stories, I mean, Jesus disagrees with people a lot. A lot of
Hmm.
people disagree with Jesus, and he doesn't get super angry about it most of the
Hmm.
time, unless they're being terrible.
Hmm.
But like in this case, the guy just couldn't take that giant step.
Hmm.
And who knows, maybe he did later, but he went away and he was sad. And Jesus gave him something to think about.
Hmm.
And then you're talking to the blind guy who is also very different. Everybody else is trying to reject this person. I've seen the church services where a homeless person, a visibly not okay person, comes in and is escorted out
Hmm. Hmm.
of a church service. And Jesus is like, no, no, stop it.
Yeah.
Come over here.
Bad cats.
Yeah.
Come on, you guys. Like, this person is interested in my ministry,
Hmm. Hmm.
is interested in this project that I have going. And all he asks the guy is, like, or he doesn't even ask the guy to do anything. He's like, what can I do for you?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And I think he's being an example of, like, it's not about these conversations and coming to answers. It's about what can I do for these people?
Hmm.
What can I do for other people? And like, that's sort of the opposite of burning someone alive for
Right.
having a slightly different opinion,
Yeah.
you know?
100%.
Like, he doesn't even ask this guy what he believes.
Hmm.
Like, the guy, he wants
Oh,
to get healed and he thinks Jesus could do it.
yeah.
And he's like, oh, okay, well, we can work on that together,
Right.
and it doesn't even say that like he could see. It says, maybe I'm wrong, but I think it's possible that the guy just got helped by their community,
Mm.
because people have disabilities and they survive as long as there are people to help them.
Hmm.
you
Hmm.
know it's possible anyway.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I think, yeah, I mean, I do think all of these stories that in Mark that we've looked at over the last couple of weeks, again, they just paint a very different picture than we see in John Calvin's Geneva in the 1500s. Um, One thing you mentioned that I do think is really significant is the fickleness of the crowd in this story. Like they start off saying shush shush shush. I mean, they scold him like don't interrupt the master. And then master says, call him forward. And they say, oh, get up, be encouraged. He's calling you. Like the crowd goes from being like, yeah, shut up. And then Jesus says, I'll bring him forward. They go, oh, let's go. And that, oh my gosh. I think Mark puts that in there because there's some exasperation there too, right? You know, like
Yeah.
how fickle the crowd that's following Jesus is.
I love that observation. So I have to read Camille's comment.
Hmm.
She says, sounds like the Oklahoma education superintendent wanting a specific Bible
Oh,
used
right.
in the schools. Indoctrination has to start early to make sure folks stay in line. One
Mhm.
document, one mind. Resistance is futile, or you are a heretic. Sort of like the Chinese Red Book. Constantine knew how to use religion as a way to rule by fear of heresy, divine guilt, and using religion to justify killing.
Yeah.
Can I point
It
out that that
really,
Oklahoma Bible was also supposed to contain a copy of the Constitution?
Oh, interesting.
it all comes back to the question of what do people actually think the project is,
Hmm. Hmm.
right? Rather than a creed, like I believe in God the Father Almighty, like this set of truth propositions. If we were gonna tackle that work in a committee again today,
Hmm.
I really feel like it's more what is the nature of the project,
Yeah. Yes. No, I
right?
think yes,
Are
really
we
good.
are we
Hmm.
are we building something to be powerful and important, a nice tidy hierarchy to put somebody at the top of?
Hmm.
No,
Hmm.
no,
Hmm.
bad cats.
Yeah.
Is people for whatever reason that's the project people believe in, and so then the things that we tell them they need to believe, or the things they've been taught they need to believe, or the things they just do believe, they project it onto that and say, okay, cool, now we're going to go build this empire. Woo,
Hmm.
empires for Jesus.
Yeah. Well, and you see the same thing, and I'm glad you brought up that Camille, that you brought up the version of the Bible that we're going to use. You don't like there's so many different translations of the Bible. You go to Bible Gateway, I think it's BibleGateway.com, and just look at the number of translations. There's a whomptillion of them. I don't know exactly how many, but I mean, all from very, I mean, and because there's so many different translation approaches, right? And the idea is that part of the reason I love having different translations, and by the way, you don't need to know Greek or Hebrew anymore to study the. I mean, you do need it if you're doing academic study of the Bible, okay? Because obviously you have to be. But part of what you get from reading different translations is you get a sense of the diversity of possible meanings that you can draw out of a particular text. And I do something I've done a lot with introduction to Bible students, where we'll look at the same text from different translations and I'll say, okay, what do you think is really going on here? And it's interesting because usually they'll come up with what the academics are talking about, right? But the important thing, um, as you're saying, Rob, like when we started developing different translations based on recent discoveries, archaeological discoveries and recognition and textual criticism, there was this big backlash of like, no, KJV only, right? Even though there's things in it that are demonstrably wrong, we need everyone to use the same text. Because and part of it is this false belief that if we just indoctrinate people the right way, then they'll be more tractable. Like then they'll fall in line. And I think that's a big part of that impulse, as you're saying, that project. We just need everyone to be on the same page. We need everyone to agree. I want to say, like, I am a pretty orthodox in my way of thinking. I know other people think I'm a heretic, but I'm a pretty orthodox Christian in terms of creedal beliefs. And I mean, I'm a Methodist. John Wesley's like way up there. The articles, the 36 articles of religion, I really like. I think they're beautiful. I love some of the poetic language of the creeds, but there is so much about the creedal beliefs that make Christianity about having the right beliefs instead of following Jesus. I think that's one of the tensions that we see develop. That the idea is like if people just believe the right things, then they do the right things. No, that's not true. It's completely wrong. Um, we can believe we you can believe quote all the right things and still be a horrible human being. John Calvin comes to mind, right? Or um, yes, following Jesus is not the same thing as believing the right things. And there's a huge part of following Jesus, I think, that um requires a tolerance for diversity, requires a tolerance for pluralism. You know, Jesus, again, we see throughout the Gospels, Jesus and the Syrophoenician woman, Jesus and the Samaritan woman, the Magi coming to the manger. There's this sense of expansiveness. Now, it might have been, oh, we're right, and those other people have a little bit of the truth, and they're coming to us because we're right. That's fine. But at least there is a sense of like this is part of what it means to follow God, is this expansive view of the value of human beings and all their diversity. Um, anyway, that's actually not the sermon I meant to give, but that's a lot. But I think that's true. I mean, I think that's a big part of this. Anyway, other
I
thoughts?
think
Go ahead.
I think the a common theme in Mark, especially these stories that we're looking at, and but also just throughout the Gospels, is people asking Jesus for the wrong thing.
Mm, hmm.
People asking Jesus the wrong
Yeah,
questions, and him being like, "No, that's not what you should be thinking about."
right.
Because can we point out the fact that people, disabled people,
Hmm.
have worth?
Hmm.
They don't have to be made perfect.
Hmm.
What is perfect? Like they don't have to be made so they can see to
Hmm.
matter.
Hmm.
Um, Jesus welcomes this guy into community,
Hmm.
and he follows them. He
Hmm.
goes with them. Um, I think the thing that the guy had like before was he was poverty. He was in poverty.
Mm.
He was alone. He was uncared for.
Hmm.
You know. Um, and then the other stories as well, like the rich guy being like, "Just tell me what I need to do,"
Hmm. Hmm.
And Jesus isn't really. So he gives him an impossible thing, or a really, really, really difficult thing that he knows he's not going to do. You know, because we're having this conversation about what matters,
Hmm.
and what matters is what you're doing for people, the commandments,
Mm.
you know, how you're treating other people around you, and like, and obviously James and John like talking about hierarchy and just,
Hmm. Hmm.
but a lot of the other stories, I mean, the image of like, I'll give you the water of life,
Yeah.
like like this sort of turning whatever they're asking for on its head.
Hmm.
um yeah, like it's about what matters
Hmm.
to Jesus. He's not necessarily trying to fulfill all of these needs. And I feel kind of icky with the way that like the I mean, I think it's cool when Jesus does miracles, when Jesus helps people, physically,
Hmm.
but I also don't want to erase like disabled people.
Hmm. Hmm.
and and I don't think Jesus does either. I think he wants them to matter in his community just as much as, you know,
Hmm.
able-bodied people.
Yeah. Well, and I think for Mark, I think you're right because and I would follow. There's this the book that I'm really following in Mark is Ched Meyer's Binding the Strong Man. Again, huge book. If you really want a great commentary on Mark, that's from a liberation theology perspective. Um, but since like a big part of Jesus' ministry is liberating people, and I think it is contextual. I think in like as you said, there's an interlocking piece here of disability and poverty. This man who's blind is a beggar because he cannot see in this context. And so I think it's like, well, what do we need to do for liberation? Well, in this context, he needs to be able to see. I think in our context is, right now, you can't get disability unless you are in poverty. Like if you have savings, if you have too much savings, you can't get disability.
He's also a
And
beggar because he was rejected by people,
well,
which is
yeah,
something else that Jesus is like, talking to the crowd about, like, stop it.
yeah.
Stop rejecting him.
If there, right,
you know?
if there were already the kingdom, he would not be a beggar, right? He wouldn't be
I
in poverty.
so
Go ahead, Rob.
I have to jump in on this. Like
Go
I'm
ahead.
dying. This
Good.
like I love what Miller is focusing
Hmm.
on here because the way Mark has structured this story, there are so many contrasts that are
Hmm.
immediately able to be noticed. Okay,
Hmm.
because like honestly, maybe Jesus miraculously restores the guy's sight. Okay, awesome.
Hmm.
Maybe he doesn't. Like what? It's still I think the contrast is what was going on in this guy's life before and
Hmm.
what was going on after.
Hmm.
Before, he's a blind beggar, and people are shouting him down, telling him not to bother
Right.
this teacher. Right?
Hmm.
He doesn't matter. He's being ignored. He's absolutely marginalized. Okay.
Hmm.
So one, there's this invitation, like, well, you can come follow us.
Hmm.
Part of our thing. Okay, he's been liberated from a
Hmm.
community that did not value him to be
Hmm.
incorporated into one that does. It's
Hmm.
chosen family.
Hmm.
He can have that whether he can see now or not.
Hmm.
So now, okay, he's following Jesus. We have this very strong focus on belief, like you were talking about that, right? So is
Hmm.
he obviously now like learning from Jesus firsthand and part of this really intimate community? Okay, cool. Yes, great. But also, at the end of the day, when they're gathering around the fire or whatever and they're passing the soup around, are they forgetting his bowl of soup? No, they are not.
Hmm. Hmm.
He's not getting the crumbs anymore either. He's part
Yeah.
of the crew.
Mm.
That's another aspect of how his life changed by being liberated from one community and embraced in this one. And it didn't require his sight being restored for that to happen.
Mm. Hmm.
So, yeah, I really think that this really does illuminate that question of what do you think the project is,
Hmm.
right? If the project is to go live a different way, different kind of people, right? Then it looks a certain way. And if the project is keep doing the same things we've been doing, but change the branding and find different people to kill, and now I'm going to be in charge,
Hmm. Hmm.
that's that's trash.
Yeah, no, I like the way you put that. Well, right. So maybe the miracle is when the fickle crowd flips the script and says, "Okay, actually come up here." Instead of shushing him, they bring him forward.
That was a huge miracle, getting
That
that
was
ignorant crowd to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. When Jesus says, "No, bring him forward," right? Yeah, absolutely. Instead of being ignored, we're actually going to pay attention to you and listen to you. Yeah. Well, I appreciate that. That's not so that's a good place to stop. Are there any other comments or thoughts about this passage or the story? Or the Michael Servetus stuff? By the way, I just think Michael Servetus was a badass. I mean, you
Yeah.
know, again, I
Oh
don't
my gosh.
We will continue our conversation.
Oh yeah. He's like,
Like,
we're not done here. Yeah, you can burn me. We're not done.
oh,
Oh
Bad
man.
penny, John.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean he was an anti-Trinitarian guy. Actually, some Unitarians claim Servetus. He was more of a modalist than an anti-Trinitarian, just, to be clear. Um, he believed that God operated in different modes, but some of his writing is really beautiful, and he borrowed from like Tertullian and Origen and the ancient church fathers. I mean, he was right in line with some of those guys. Um, his big the big red flag was that he was a modalist, that oh my gosh, really? Anyway, so
Spoke Hebrew, as you pointed out. So if he was actually a Spanish Jew, like, I mean, the whole apparent, polytheism of
mhm.
Trinitarianism is, this gigantic sticking point. So like
Yeah.
trying to, being modalist about it is he's actually trying really hard to make nice about this.
I think, yeah, I mean, he might be integrating those parts of his theology, possibly his mother's religious history,
yeah.
and the Christian theology that he was brought up around. The other big part was his first trip to Rome was when he was appalled by Roman Catholic. Like he was originally Roman Catholic, but he went to Rome and he was like, "This is gross," and I was like, "All right, yeah." You know?
Like
Anyway, I like him. I think he's a great guy.
the tattoo.
I get, yeah. So thank y'all for a good discussion, and thanks to those of you who've been listening. And uh there are a few comments that I missed on YouTube. Sorry about that, y'all. I get hooked in. It's hard for me to pay attention to a couple of places. Um so let's go ahead and wrap up. I'm gonna go ahead and pull the screen up. Oh, by the way, I've got a closing prayer that is very Trinitarian, FY, but it was from today. So anyway, there you go.
Michael Services.
Yeah.
Michael Silver, this is like, oh, Dave.
I don't think he would want to kill you though. I think
No, he
that's
probably
probably up
wouldn't.
there.
He probably wouldn't kill me. He'd say, "We'll just talk about
List
it
of people
later."
to, yeah, he's on your list of people to argue with after you die.
That's
There
right.
you go. Today's closing prayer comes from Antiochus, circa 400. O Holy Spirit, most merciful Comforter, you proceed from the Father in a manner beyond our understanding. Come, I beseech you, and take up your abode in my heart. Purify and cleanse me from all sin, and sanctify my soul. Cleanse it from every impurity, water its dryness, melt its coldness, and save it from sinful ways. Make me truly humble and resigned, that I may be pleasing to you, and that you abide with me forever. Most blessed light, most amiable light, enlighten me, my God, give yourself to me, and kindle in my innermost soul the fire of your love. My Lord, please instruct, direct, and defend me in all things. Give me strength against all immoderate fears and against despondency. Bestow upon me a true faith, a firm hope, and a sincere and perfect love. Grant that I always do your most gracious will. Amen.
God is love. Nothing is wasted. All things shall be well. Go in peace.
So thank you all so much for being with us today. Again, if you were watching on YouTube or Facebook, if you don't mind just clicking like or comment with where you're watching from, so we have a way to count you. I'm going to go ahead and stop the stream. If you're on Zoom, you can stick around for a minute more.